What really happens when you quit sugar for 30 days? Not the polished version, not the fake perfect version, the real version. The one where the first few days feel weird, your cravings start acting up, and you begin to realize how often sugar has been in your life, because that is the part most people miss. Sugar is not just dessert, it is in drinks, snacks, breakfast foods, sauces, little treats, and daily habits. And when you remove it, even for just 30 days, your body does not stay quiet. It reacts. At first, that reaction can feel uncomfortable. The first thing many people notice is the cravings, not just a mild craving, but repeated thoughts about sweets. They show up when you are bored, tired, stressed, or just sitting around doing nothing. Suddenly, the snack you used to ignore becomes the only thing your brain wants. That is not random. Your body gets used to fast energy and the quick hit, so when sugar disappears, there is an adjustment period. For many people, that adjustment is the hardest part. Not because they are doing something wrong, but because their routine is changing. And routine is powerful. People often eat sugar out of familiarity, not hunger. So when sugar is removed, it feels like something is missing. That is why the first few days can feel frustrating. You may feel low, more irritable, or notice unexpected energy dips. You might think, "This is harder than I thought." That is normal and where many people quit. The body asks for what it has grown used to, and the mind looks for excuses. Just one sweet drink, just one snack, just one treat. That is where the test begins. The first part of quitting sugar is not just about food, it is about resistance. It is about making it through the time when your habits push back. But if you keep going, something starts to change. By the end of the first week, the cravings usually feel less intense. They do not vanish, but they stop shouting as loudly. That alone can feel like progress. Then, the rest of the experience starts to shift. You may notice your energy feels steadier, less up and down. Many people do not realize how much sugar affects their day until they stop and pay attention. When sugar is gone, that cycle starts to calm down. For many, that is one of the first big wins. With fewer energy swings, the day feels easier to manage. That does not mean every day feels amazing, but the sharp highs and lows begin to fade. Another early change is how food starts to feel. When sugar has been routine, normal food can feel less exciting at first. After a while, your taste adjusts and simple foods can taste more satisfying. People often think quitting sugar means losing something, but senses can start waking up again. By the middle of the first week, many people start thinking about food differently. Not just what they want to eat, but why they want to eat it. A lot of sugar eating is automatic and happens without much thought. Once sugar is removed, those habits become more visible. You start noticing moments when you would normally reach for something sweet. You start seeing the pattern, and that awareness changes things. At first, it can be uncomfortable to see how automatic some choices were, but it is also powerful, because once you can see the habit, you can start breaking it. And that is where the 30-day challenge starts becoming more than just a food experiment. It becomes a reset, not a perfect one, not an instant transformation, but a reset. By the time you get into week 2, the challenge often feels different. The cravings may not be gone, but they are usually less intense than they were at the start. The body starts adapting, the mind starts settling, and the whole experience becomes a little more manageable. This is also the point where many people feel tempted to relax a little too soon. They think the hard part is over just because the first wave passed, but in reality, this is where discipline matters most, because now you are not just resisting sugar. You are also learning how to move through your day without depending on it. That is a bigger shift than most people expect. You begin to realize that sugar was not just a taste. It was part of the pattern, part of the comfort, part of the routine. And when you remove it, you have to face the spaces it used to fill. That is why this challenge can feel so eye-opening. It is not only about what you stop eating, it is about what you start noticing. And once you start noticing, you cannot really go back to ignoring it. Around this point, some people also begin to feel lighter in the sense that they are not constantly thinking about their next sweet fix. That mental space matters more than people think, Because when food is always on your mind, everything else feels a little harder to focus on. When that noise starts to fade, even slightly, the day can feel calmer. And that calm is part of the reason people keep going. Because after the first uncomfortable stretch, the challenge starts to reveal its real value. Not perfection, not miracle results. Just a clearer sense of how your body responds when sugar is no longer running the show. And that is where the second half of the story gets even more interesting. Because by the time you reach the later stages of the 30 days, the changes are no longer just about cravings. They start showing up in the way you feel, the way you eat, and the way you respond to everyday habits. And that is exactly where the next part begins. By the time you move into the second half of the 30 days, something subtle but important starts to happen. You begin to feel a little more in control, not in a dramatic way, not like everything is suddenly perfect, but in small, noticeable moments. Moments where you would normally reach for something sweet, and you pause. Moments where the craving shows up, but it does not take over. That shift is easy to overlook, but it is one of the biggest changes in the entire process. Because at the beginning, it can feel like the cravings are in charge. Now, it starts to feel like you have a say, and that changes how you move through your day. Around this stage, many people also notice that their hunger feels different, more stable, more predictable. Instead of feeling random urges to snack all the time, meals begin to feel more satisfying. You eat, and you actually feel done. Not temporarily distracted, but genuinely full. That difference matters, because when hunger is more stable, decision-making becomes easier. You are not constantly negotiating with yourself. You are not always thinking about what to eat next. You are just eating when it makes sense, and moving on. That alone can make your entire day feel lighter. Another change that often shows up here is how your energy feels across longer periods of time. Earlier on, there might have been dips, moments where your body was still adjusting, but now, things begin to even out more clearly. You may notice that you can go longer without feeling drained. You may notice that your focus holds a little better. You may notice that your day feels less like a series of ups and downs, and more like a steady line. Again, not perfect, just smoother. And that smoothness is what many people were missing without realizing it. Because when energy is constantly rising and crashing, it becomes your normal. You stop questioning it. You just adapt to it. But once that pattern starts to fade, you begin to see the difference. And once you feel that difference, it becomes harder to ignore. By week 3, there is also a mental shift that starts becoming more obvious. You become more aware of your triggers, not just the obvious ones like desserts or sugary drinks, but the hidden ones. Stress, boredom, fatigue, even certain environments. You begin to notice that the desire for sugar is not always about taste. Sometimes it is about how you feel, and that awareness gives you options. Instead of reacting automatically, you start choosing your response. You might decide to eat something more balanced. You might decide to drink water and wait a few minutes. You might decide to ignore the urge completely. Those small decisions add up, because every time you choose differently, you are reinforcing a new pattern, and over time, that pattern becomes your new normal. This is also the point where food itself can start to feel more satisfying in a different way. Not just because of taste, but because of how it leaves you feeling afterward. When meals are not followed by a quick drop in energy, they feel more complete. When you are not chasing something sweet right after eating, the meal feels like it actually did its job. That sense of completion is something a lot of people have not felt in a while, and once it comes back, it changes your relationship with food. You stop seeing meals as something that needs to be followed by a reward. You start seeing them as enough on their own. As you move closer to the end of the 30 days, the changes become less about effort and more about awareness. You begin to notice patterns that were invisible before, how often sugar showed up in your routine, how certain times of day triggered cravings, how certain emotions pushed you towards certain foods. That awareness is one of the most valuable parts of the entire experience, because it stays with you even after the 30 days are over. It changes how you see your habits, And once you see them clearly, you have more control over them. By the final week, a lot of people reach a point where they feel different. Not like a completely new person, but like a more aware version of themselves. They understand their patterns better. They understand their cravings better. They understand how their body responds to what they eat. And that understanding is what makes the biggest difference going forward. Because the goal was never just to quit sugar for 30 days. The goal was to learn something from the process, something that you can actually carry with you. Now, here is something that surprises a lot of people by the end of this challenge. It is not that they never want sugar again. It is that they no longer feel like they need it in the same way. That urgency starts to fade. That constant pull becomes quieter. And when that happens, your choices start coming from a different place. Not from habit, not from impulse, but from awareness. That is a powerful shift. Because once you reach that point, you are no longer reacting automatically. You are deciding. And that changes everything. At the end of the 30 days, the results are not always dramatic on the outside. Sometimes they are. Sometimes people notice physical changes. Sometimes they do not. But internally, the difference is usually clear. Cravings are quieter. Energy is more stable. Hunger feels more normal. And your relationship with food feels less chaotic, more intentional, more controlled, and more understood. That is the real outcome. Not perfection, not extreme transformation, just a better sense of control over something that used to feel automatic. And maybe the most important part is this. Once you go through this process, even once, you realize something simple but powerful. Your habits are not fixed. They are not permanent. They can change. It may take time. It may feel uncomfortable at first, but change is possible. And when you experience that for yourself, it becomes easier to apply it to other areas of your life. Because now you have proof. Proof that even something that felt deeply automatic can be adjusted. That is what makes this more than just a 30-day challenge. It becomes a reference point. Something you can look back on and say, I did that, I changed that. And that kind of confidence carries over. So, what really happens when you quit sugar for 30 days? You go through discomfort. You face cravings, you adjust, you learn. And eventually, you come out with a clearer understanding of your body and your habits. Not because sugar is the enemy, but because awareness changes behavior, and behavior shapes results. That is the full story. And once you understand that, the decision to change something in your routine becomes a lot more realistic. Not easy, but realistic. And sometimes, that is all you need to get started. Thanks for watching True Health Tales. If this helped you, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next truth.